Okay, welcome to part 5 of notes, the cycle of life. Okay, I'm kidding. We're not really going to play that the whole time. Learning targets, we're going to cover number 17. Explain the importance of cycling matter, or cycling of matter in an ecosystem and ways that humans are affecting these cycles. Okay, biogeochemical. Okay, I know that sounds like a really big word. Here, let me get everything up so you can write while I talk. Just kidding. Okay, here we go. So, bio, we're talking about living things. Geo, we're talking about geography, or like the land. Chemical, we're talking about chemical factors. Okay, so biogeochemical, we're talking about how all of these can interact and how matter flows through all of these in a biosphere. There's 4 that we're going to go over. I'm going to go over them quickly because we just don't have a lot of time to spend on them. If you have questions or don't understand the diagrams or how it works, please come up and ask me so that I can help clarify that for you. Okay, so we're going to go over water cycle, oxygen, carbon dioxide cycle, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So first one, water cycle, we're going to start here with rain because rain is something that, especially in springtime, we have a lot of. Okay, as it rains, water is either going to run off of the sides of the hills or the mountains, and it's going to eventually hit a creek or a stream. It's going to take it to a lake. Okay, that lake is going to eventually run off and empty out into, wow, that's a really bad arrow, and empty out into an ocean. Okay, that ocean, anytime you have water sitting exposed to the air, you're going to have evaporation. So this is a big arrow here because the ocean's very big. Lots of exposed water there. You're going to have lots of evaporation, which is why if you take a look at coastal areas along the coast, you're going to see they're going to be greener. They're going to have a lot more rain and precipitation. Okay, because that moisture is going to rise up. It's going to be kind of blown over away from the sea. Okay, and it's eventually, we're going to get enough water together to create clouds, and get clouds. Those clouds then are going to get heavy enough that they're going to rain, and then we just kind of cycle back. Okay, now take note here, percolation, that means to penetrate, so we have some percolation of water through the soil. Think of that as when it rains, if you go outside the next day, the ground is still kind of squishy. That's because some of the water is percolated or has gone through. It's been soaked up by the ground. Okay, that water is going to keep, if there's enough of it, and it rains long enough over a long period of time, okay, that water is going to keep moving down until it hits something like a rock or clay or some kind of impenetrable layer in the soil, and that's how we get groundwater. So anytime you see the big water towers, they are pulling water from underground. Okay, I think we pretty much covered everything there. Oh, no, evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration is just, we're losing water through the plants. Remember, that's what transpiration is. Okay, next, the carbon-oxygen cycle. Carbon-oxygen cycle, by the way, if you've not already done so, I would like you to actually go back and to write these cycles down. Or if you want, get online and find a couple of copies, print them out, glue them in your notes. I don't know, I don't really care what you do, but you do need to have these cycles that you can study and be prepared to identify kind of the flow of this matter through the biogeochemical cycle. Okay, so carbon-oxygen cycle, we've got here, let's start with photosynthesis, because we've talked about photosynthesis before, and one of the things that is required for photosynthesis is carbon dioxide. So as plants use that carbon dioxide, it takes it out of the atmosphere, which is why that arrow is pointing down here. Okay, it takes it out of the atmosphere and uses it, which is why it's so important for us to have plants to help take that out of the atmosphere. Okay, and then as the plants die, they're going to be decomposed, become detritus. Detritus is just a fancy word for dead, decomposed stuff. Okay, but before they die, they also are going to be eaten by animals. Those animals that eat the autotrophs are called your primary consumers. Your primary consumers are also going to be eaten by secondary or higher level consumers. And both of those consumers eventually are going to die. When they die, their bodies are going to be decomposed, become detritus. That detritus then is going to be broken down by detritivores, such as soil microbes, fungus, stuff like that, that are going to break down their bodies into the more chemical elements, like the carbon, since we're talking about carbon-oxygen cycle. Okay, since land and air do touch, we're going to have some of that carbon just naturally be released into the air, where it's going to bind to oxygen, which is where we're going to get some carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Okay, the animals, as they're living and breathing, they're breathing out carbon dioxide, so they are also going to be releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Okay, then we also have, in the trees, the conifers, pine trees, they also are going to be releasing a small amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Not a lot, just some. Okay, then we have over here humans. We, as part of our society to live, we burn fossil fuels and wood, and all of that, all those factories, all those places are actually going to be releasing a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So all of these things, there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and we keep cutting down trees, so there's less and less to take it out, and that's kind of the problem that we're seeing with global climate change, one of the problems. Okay, carbon dioxide is not the only is not the only gas that is in the atmosphere that is contributing to global warming or climate change. Okay, the nitrogen cycle is really quick. We've got plants that are going to take nitrogen out of the soil, like corn plants, since we grow lots of corn around here. Okay, they're going to use nitrogen out of the soil. They're going to remove it from the soil. Okay, and then those plants are going to die, be decomposed, and we'll get to the rest of it after a while. Okay, those plants are also going to be eaten by animals. Those animals are also going to die and be decomposed. Okay, now those animals and those plants, as they die and are decomposed, they're going to be broken down by bacteria and by fungi. They're going to be broken down into ammonium. Well, then it's going to go through a couple of extra steps. Basically, I'm going to sum it up by saying it's going to be further broken down by bacteria that is going to be break it down into the nitrates that the plants can use, or it's also going to break it down into atmospheric oxygen and release it back into the atmosphere. So bacteria basically are going to take that ammonium, break it down, and into the nitrogen that can be used for plants, and the nitrogen that is going to be released into the atmosphere. That kind of sums up all that craziness over there. Okay, then some of the nitrogen in the atmosphere is actually going to be kind of absorbed back by the land, and part of what makes this so important, or what is so helpful, is we have legumes, or we have the bean plants. Okay, those plants, the bean plants, are really helpful because what they have is they have these nodules, which you learned about in our plant section. Okay, those nodules, you can think of them as giantly apartment complexes that are way overpacked. But instead of being overpacked with people, they are overpacked, well, I wouldn't say overpacked, but they are packed full of bacteria. And that bacteria is actually going to help take that nitrogen atmosphere and release it into the type of nitrogen that can be used by plants. Okay, now so that's how we're going to get that nitrogen from atmosphere and get it back into soil. Okay, now there are also nitrogen fixing soil, bacteria that will fix nitrogen into the soil that are free living, just in the soil. They don't have to be in these nodules, but if a plant can have these nodules, then that's really helpful. In fact, a lot of farmers will rotate their crops with beans so that they can put that nitrogen back into the soil. So, for example, they'll grow corn for a couple of years, and the corn is going to take up and suck up a lot of that nitrogen as one of the nutrients it needs. And then after a couple of years, they'll rotate that crop out. They won't plant corn anymore, but they'll plant green beans or something like that. And those bean plants, are going to put nitrogen back into the soil. So they'll grow those bean plants for a few years, and then they'll rotate it out and put the corn in. And so it kind of helps to keep, so they don't completely suck the soil dry of all the nutrients they need. Okay, phosphorus cycle. There's not much more to say. We've got phosphate in the soil. Okay, new soil is created as we have rock that is broken down by rain, by wind, natural forces, break it down in smaller pieces. We get phosphate in the soil. That phosphate, some of it's going to leach out into water. You're also going to have some phosphate running off from those rocks as they're exposed. That phosphate's going to be dissolved in the water. We're going to have some chemical precipitation. Eventually, we're going to form new rocks down here, and then either the ground, we're going to have geological uplift, which means just the ground is going to be pushed up by some kind of pressure underneath. Faults move. It just is kind of the way the earth works. And as that moves up and is exposed to the air, then it's going to be eroded away, and we cycle back again. Okay, also phosphorus is an important one for plants. Plants are going to take it out of the soil, use it to grow. Wow, it's really terrible arrows today. And the plants are going to die, be decomposed, release it back into the soil. Plants are also going to be eaten by animals, but those animals also will eventually die and be decomposed and release it into the soil. Okay. All right, other things to consider. Greenhouse gases are gases that are going to basically trap the sunlight, or trap energy from the sun in our atmosphere, which is going to raise the temperature, which is going to have effect on climate. It's going to have effect on weather patterns, just climate, obviously. Gases that come from human activity, there's CH4, there's an N2O, there's CO2. All of these are going to contribute to global climate change because we are all connected. Atmosphere goes all the way around the world. It's not just a tiny atmosphere for Australia and for the US. It's all connected. Okay, biological magnification. This is when we have concentration of toxins as they move through the food chain, because if you remember, food chain are down here are primary producers and consumers. Our primary consumers have to eat more of the primary producers, and then our secondary, there's less of them, but they have to eat more of the primary. Okay, what happens is basically you get a buildup or an accumulation of these toxins as they move through the food chain. So these little guys down here, these little shrimps and stuff that the fish eat, have, well, the example here is a DDT. DDT is an insecticide that was used, I think in the 60s, and as rain came and washed the insecticide off the plants, off the soil soil runoff went into the rivers, into the lakes, and these fish were, just doing their thing, eating. Okay, the fish didn't die because they didn't have a high enough concentration of the toxin to make them die. Okay, but when we have our predator up here, these birds, in fact it was eagles, or eagles were one of the kinds of birds that were eating these fishes. They were eating so many of the fish, and the fish had eaten even more of these guys that had absorbed all of that insecticide. Then the eagles, actually it made their shells too thin, and they were dying off because none of the eggs they laid, the shells were hard enough for the eggs to survive. So, Okay, limiting elements. This is your last slide. So primary productivity, this is just the rate that organic matter is created. It is limited by available resources. If you take a look at the globe, and I know I'm out of time, so take a look at the globe, you can see where most productive areas are. That's going to be your dark green areas.